Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Elkins. I'm the host of Morning Classics on Wisconsin Public Radio. So glad to see everybody. Oh, thank you. More important for the upcoming conversation, I was the host of Simply Folk on WPR for many years. And I shared lots of Americana music and singer-songwriter music then, and I interviewed a lot of artists in that genre. I saw its popularity grow like mad with listeners across the state and beyond. And little did I know that the person we're going to hear from was a driving force behind this meaningful music finding its way to all of us on that program and across the country for that matter. And that person is Tamara Saviano. She is the author of Poets and Dreamers, My Life in Americana Music. And on behalf of the Wisconsin Book Festival, we thank you all very much for coming to hear about this fascinating, rich book at today's event. Thanks also to the Madison Public Library, which is celebrating 150 years of service to our community. We are especially grateful to the Madison Public Library Foundation and to all of the sponsors of the book festival, including my employer, Wisconsin Public Radio. Before we get started, please put your phone on silent, but feel free to post using the hashtag WIBookFest if you're so inclined. And one last note, you can find books for sale just outside this room from our beloved bookseller, Mystery to Me. All right, so I am so excited to introduce this author. Tamara Saviano has made an enormous impact on Americana music. In fact, you've probably heard music that she has produced, music that has won a Grammy Award. An album that she produced was used by Ken Burns in his documentary Country Music, and she served as a consultant for that project. One of my favorite Americana tracks of all time is Mavis Staples singing Stephen Foster's Hard Times. And she made that happen, and I was astonished to read in the book about that exact recording session. It was just, I was starry-eyed reading about that. Tamara has spent most of her career in Nashville, but she was born not too far from here in Milwaukee. And she first experienced Summerfest at the age of 13, a formative age to be at Summerfest, I think. And then she found her way to the radio offices of WOKY and WMIL in Milwaukee. And that she learned the ropes there, and she published a country magazine. She did all kinds of work behind the scenes. She met the mentor who would change her life there. She interviewed George Strait at the Wisconsin State Fair and Alan Jackson at the Bradley Center. But that is just a smidgen of things early on here in Wisconsin. Tamara made her way to Nashville, where, to use a phrase from her bio, she became a creative ringleader. She had noticed from early on that there was a certain collection of progressive-minded artists who did not want to compromise their artistic ideals. They didn't want to conform to the country radio norms. They were writing meaningful music, literary music in many cases, and they didn't have a label home. They didn't have an award show home. They didn't have a chart home. And she was on the ground floor in getting this new genre up and running, the Americana genre. She helped to get it the support that it needed to grow and to thrive. And along the way, she produced Beautiful Dreamer, Stephen Foster, songs of Stephen Foster, which won the Grammy Award for Best Traditional Folk Album. She produced two other albums which were nominated for a Grammy Award, a tribute to Guy Clark and Chris Christopherson's double album, Cedar Creek Sessions. She worked very closely with Chris Christopherson for a couple of decades. They became dear friends. She also worked very closely with Guy Clark, whose biography she wrote. I love the title of the biography, Without Getting Killed or Caught, The Life and Music of Guy Clark. That won the Belmont Award from the International Country Music Conference. She's also a film producer. She was the driving force behind a documentary of the same name of Guy Clark. There's so much more albums, more books, more awards, including the Americana Association Album of the Year. She produced that award show. She was the first woman president of the Americana Association. And throughout this fascinating journey, Tamara Saviano met and partied with and worked with some of the greats, from Johnny and June Carter Cash to Elvis Costello, Tanya Tucker, Loretta Lynn, Vince Gill, Emmylou Harris. It is a really long list, and the book is so aptly named, Poets and Dreamers, My Life in Americana Music. Please give a warm Wisconsin welcome to Tamara Saviano.
Thank you. Exhausting.
That was a long introduction, but what a rich life you have had and so many accomplishments.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey.
Well, I'd like to start in Wisconsin, and I mentioned that you were born in Milwaukee. I focused mostly on your work in Nashville in the introduction, but those Wisconsin roots run deep.
They do. I've been gone for 30 years. I never meant to stay away this long, and plan to come back, by the way. That's my next move.
So before we get started to talk about those Wisconsin roots, I would love it, if you don't mind, would you read a paragraph about that?
Sure.
The very beginning of chapter 2 on page 20. Chapter 2 is called The Backstory. If you would read the first 2 paragraphs and give us a little picture of growing up in Wisconsin.
Okay. How do I end up hanging with Guy Clark and other Americana dreamers? It all starts in the 1960s in my great-grandparents' upper flat in Cudahy, Wisconsin. That's where I first fell in love with folk music. The object of my affection is my great-grandfather Oliver's Regina music box, an 1898 model that plays hole-punched metal discs. The plucking of teeth on a steel comb is inspired by the Carillion bell towers used in Europe. So beautiful and magical it makes me cry. Stephen Foster's My Old Kentucky Home and Beautiful Dreamer are my favorites. The Regina sits at the end of a wide carpeted hallway. The flat smells like Grandma Gert's rosewater perfume and the chocolate chip cookies she bakes daily. My mom's parents, Ellis and Jean, live on the first floor, where there is more of a molasses cookie scent because they are Grandpa's favorites. My cousins and I climb the steep, curved stairway many times a day to visit our great-grandparents, Oliver and Gert. That's where the music lives. Gert plays piano and accordion, while Oliver accompanies her on a marimba phone as they run through pop standards from the 1930s and 40s, made famous by Kay Kaiser, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Dinah Shore, and the Mills Brothers. We are mesmerized by our great-grandparents' enthusiastic live performances and the obvious joy it brings them. Before returning to the first floor, we sit in a semicircle around Oliver as he spins his favorite discs on the Regina.
So evocative. I just love that. It just sets the tone. You hear the music, you smell the smells, you can see the kids running up and down the stairway to visit their great-grandparents. Just a magical passage. So evocative. But what struck me as I was going back over it later is Stephen Foster and Beautiful Dreamer, and the title of your book. And this is where it starts, and it's choking me up. Your book affected me deeply. It was just so full of stories like that. But did you have, when you were writing, when you were pulling all of this together, did you have any inclination that this music would be setting you on this journey?
No, I didn't. I couldn't have possibly have dreamt up everything that I've done in the last 30 plus years. But I did know that music was important to me. I knew that from a very young age. And sorry, I'm getting choked up just because I'm thinking about my grandparents. Being with them was really special. I was very lucky.
And it sounds like you had musicians throughout your family tree. So music was an integral part of your family.
It was, and even the people that didn't play loved music, and so there was always music playing, on the turntable. Yeah, everybody in my family was a music lover, and I think, I don't know if you've ever met anybody that really wasn't into music. I've met a few of those people through my life, and I could never understand. It was like, wait a minute, you don't, wait, I have a person in mind who said, well, if something's on the radio, it's okay, but I was spending every dollar I made from the time I started working at Taco Bell on music and books, music and books, so it's always been very important to me.
Well, let's talk about your first job, your internship. You made your way to WMIL and what's the other one?
WOKY,
right,
yeah.
in Milwaukee as an intern.
Yes.
And holy cow, what a job you had. Jobs, plural. You wore every hat in the place.
Well, I wore new hats in the place. One of my coworkers is actually here. Hi, Susie. It was a really innovative company. It was before deregulation, so Sundance Broadcasting. And the owners decided that they wanted to branch out into, instead of just standard radio, they wanted to start a magazine and an interactive phone system. This is back in the days before the internet. And so that's what I did. My formal title was Director of Database Marketing. But what I did was publish 2 magazines, one for each station, and I ran the interactive phone system, and then I did a lot of different promotions and had sales guys selling ads, and had kind of my own little department within the station.
So you already had your own department.
Yes, I did have my own department.
Shades of things to come, I think.
Yes.
Right.
And Brian Ongaro, who you referenced as the mentor, he was great because we were building this department from scratch. It had never been done before. And he would say things like, just make a decision. If you make the wrong decision, you can go back and make another decision to fix it. So he gave me a lot of freedom to build that department.
What a wonderful way to start out.
It was.
What struck me there is that WMIL was a country station, a big country station at the heyday of country. And you were noticing that there were artists that you really liked that weren't getting airplay.
Right. Yeah, there was a little bit of a joke with the program director at the time, Carrie Wolf, that if I liked it, it was not going to be a radio hit. And I would bring him songs sometimes, Rodney Crowell's an example, and there was no way it was getting played. So there was this Americana stuff bubbling that didn't have a name yet, but it was all the stuff that our music director, Mitch Morgan, was throwing in a pile on the floor, and I would retrieve it, and it became a great record collection. I was really lucky.
Hard to imagine Rodney Crowell now, somebody saying, no.
Yeah, well, and he had country hits in the 80s, big country hits, but by the 90s, the early 90s, when I was there, he was, over, which is hard to believe because, of course, he's still creating and touring and working, and he's wonderful, yeah, so.
Wow. So you were noticing that country music was blocking out these artists, AAA was blocking out these artists, and they really didn't have a home.
They didn't have a home, exactly.
So you headed to Nashville, and you were working you had a number of jobs in Nashville, but you managed to connect with other artists that were like-minded and other people working in the music industry that were like-minded at the very beginning of this genre starting to
Yeah.
find its way.
When I got to Nashville, I got there August 1st, 1995. And that was the first year that there was a Gavin, which is a radio trade magazine, had an Americana chart. And I met the guys that kind of made that happen right away. You know, all of us that liked, as Emmylou Harris calls it, weird music, we all found each other. And from that, I started to build my career from this group of music business misfits that started the Americana radio chart, and then 5 years later, it grew into the Americana Music Association.
It was interesting to see the background of how the name even came about, because there were so many different, there was outlaw country, there was progressive country, there was no depression, Western beat, I think were some of the words or phrases that tried to get going, but it was Americana that stuck.
There were a lot of arguments about what this, what the radio chart should be called, and I wasn't in the room for those, so it was already established by the time I got there. But.
And so the Americana Association was born, and boy, you really were active with that.
I was, yeah.
You were the first woman president of that association.
Yeah, I think I was the third president and the first woman. Maybe it was the fourth, but early on. And I produced the award shows at the Ryman Auditorium, the first ones we did there. For the first 5 or 6 or 7 years, I've lost track. And I was on the board, and I was very active. Started my own company, and yeah.
One thing that I found with the book is that, or I found that the overarching theme of the book is free speech. It comes up over and over with the artists that you worked with. And the Americana Association gives a free speech award every year. And was that something how did that come about, the free speech award?
So yeah, every year they gave the Spirit of Americana Free Speech Award. And it was really to award artists who used their voices to further free speech. And the first one that got that award was Johnny Cash. We had him at our award show. It was the last time he and June ever performed. We didn't, of course, know that was going to be the case. But, the man in black, he wore black because it stood for, people that couldn't speak for themselves. He recited the Ragged Old Flag at the award show. Johnny Cash was an advocate for Native Americans long before anybody else was doing that. And yeah, I think it was the Americana community planting their flag right from the beginning, saying we are going to support these artists and people that want to use their voice for good. John Siegenthaler, I don't know if any of you know who he was, but he worked in the Bobby Kennedy administration, and he was an editor or publisher of the Tennessee, and I can't remember, but started the Free Speech Center, which happened to be in Nashville because he lived there. And so we partnered with the I can't remember the proper name, but it's like the Center for Free Speech, that they went, they worked around the country on the First Amendment. And so it was a big part of Americana right from the start. And the artists that are Americana artists, they're not shying away from speaking their minds.
And neither are you.
Yeah, as Chris Christopherson and I used to say, our big mouths get us in trouble a lot.
Well, you had an incident which actually led to you working with Chris Christopherson. Why don't you tell us about that and how that happened?
Yeah, so after 9/11, and we were getting ready to go to war in Afghanistan and gearing up for war, that it just seems so quaint now compared to what's going on now. But at the time, emotions were all over the map, and there was this you're with us or against us thing. And Charlie Daniels, Devil Went Down to Georgia, long-haired country boy, by this time in the early 2000s was very conservative. And he was writing a blog at the time on his website, and he took the actor Sean Penn to task because Sean had flown to the Middle East somewhere to do a humanitarian visit. And so Charlie Daniels said in this post that Sean Penn was a traitor and should be thrown in jail and all of this for going to the Middle East. And his publicist, Charlie's publicist, sent out this, blog and an email. And the first time I got it, I deleted it. Second time I got it, I wrote back and said, please take me off your mailing list. And the third time I got it, I was just sick of looking at it. So I sort of went point by point and argued that just as Charlie Daniels was free to say whatever he wanted, Sean Penn was, as an American, free to speak his own mind. So the publicist called my boss. I was working for Great American Country cable channel at the time. And I was the operations manager in Nashville. And the publicist called my boss and complained. And so my boss called me and said, you can't talk about politics in the music industry anymore. And I'm like, oh, no. All my friends work in music. I wasn't married yet, but my then boyfriend worked in the music business. And I'm like, look, I'm an American. I can talk about politics with whomever I want, whenever I want, wherever I want. And thank you. And so they asked me to resign, and I said, I'm not resigning. You'll have to fire me. And that's exactly what happened. And word got around pretty quickly in Nashville, and it was a big deal. Surprisingly a big deal. The next week, the Dixie Chicks thing happened, so it took all the heat off of me immediately.
Well, but in that between the time that the Dixie Chicks thing happened and the time you were fired, you got a lot of hate mail, and
Yes.
you were vilified, and you were
Absolutely.
attacked.
I had people, all hiding behind anonymous monikers. No one was willing to, give their name, but, tell me that my career was over and, didn't deserve to live. Yeah, it was pretty hateful, and that was a long time ago. So it's, it's amazing to see how things have progressed. But anyway, so when I worked at GAC, we rented an office from a guy named Al Bonetta, who was John Prine's business partner. They owned Oh Boy Records. And so because his name was Bonetta and my name was Saviano, we automatically, hit it off, this Italian thing. And after work, most nights, I would go upstairs and have a glass of wine with him after work. And sometimes Prine would be there and sometimes not. But Al and I would always have a glass of wine after work, and we got to be good friends. This is over a 4-year period. And so Al introduced me to Chris Christopherson, and he hired me because of this whole business. Yeah, I got to work with Chris because of that.
And if you wouldn't mind reading another passage about that first time you met Chris in person,
Okay.
beginning of chapter 11, The Sage and the Student is the name of the chapter. I love that her chapter titles are also wonderful.
What page is that stuff in?
That is on page 108. If you would start at the second paragraph and read those three.
Second paragraph?
Starting with my first real conversation.
Okay. And how long do you want me to read?
And just to the very top paragraph of the next page.
Okay. My first real conversation with Chris is on Monday, June 16th, 2003. Chris and I spent more than an hour on the phone getting to know each other. At least half of that time we talk about social justice, journalism, and the First Amendment. Chris says, I like that you stood up for your beliefs even though it cost you your job. It's not a stretch to say that Chris and I hit it off immediately. We're old friends already, Chris says as he signs off. A few weeks later, I meet Chris and his wife Lisa at the WTTW television studio in Chicago for a taping of the music show Soundstage. Actor Russell Crowe and his band 30 Odd Foot of Grunts opened the show. On Chris's closing set, Russell and his band join Chris on Sunday Morning Coming Down and Me and Bobby McGee.
One more.
During the downtime, Chris, Lisa, and I compare notes on the music business and laugh about every little absurdity. We have a similar sense of humor. Philosophically, we are on the same page. Chris and Lisa are refreshingly kind and down to earth. It feels like we've been friends forever.
Thank you. What a way to meet a star. The first slide you saw tonight was Chris Christopherson with Barbra Streisand in his heyday, that handsome, beautiful man. And then the next slide was the Chris Christopherson of, well, in his 70s.
Yeah,
probably,
well,
right?
10 years. I mean, for the first one was from A Star is Born, and the second one was him and Barbara about 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And you worked with him for how long?
Well, 22 years between the time we started working together and his death, but he retired in 2020, so really 18 years that we were working, but we remained friends for his whole life, the rest of his life.
And there are so many wonderful stories in this book about Chris Christopherson, about his shows, about his behind the scenes, his compassion, and he just seems like a wonderful man, a scholar, and a poet.
Yeah. He was a wonderful, wonderful human, and it kind of ruined me for working with any other artist because they're not all like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the other super close relationship you had, long term, with a big artist was with Guy Clark.
Yes.
How did that one develop?
So Guy and I had met in the late 90s when I was an editor at Country Music Magazine. We had met a couple times in passing, but I really started to get to know him when an artist, Leroy Parnell, took me to Guy's house on April 1st, 2000. It was a Saturday. We spent all day there. Leroy and I had it in our heads that we were going to write this book about Texas music, which, we would have died before we would have finished that book. But we decided we were going to interview Guy. And really, Leroy and Guy just got high, and I asked the questions. But, as a journalist, I took my job seriously, and so I was there to work. And not only that, but I don't really get high. That's not my thing. So I didn't get high, and I didn't drink. And Guy kept trying to pressure me into doing that. He was like that.
That's what he does.
And I just wouldn't do it. I said no, and not interested, no thanks, And he really liked the fact that it was the first time that we spent any time together, and I would not get high with him because most people just gave in and did it. And so after that, he called me and invited me to lunch, and we went to lunch, and then, we just became friends. And I think, in the beginning, Guy liked me because he liked his reputation as a crotchety old man, and it didn't even faze me. I'd been around crotchety old men before. I had grandparents and great-grandparents. But then, as we got to know each other, we just became really good friends. And then he hired me to work for him, and then I wrote a book about him and made a film about him, and I'm still running the Guy Clark Family Foundation. So he's still in my life, even though he's been gone for 9 years.
He had great trust in you. That was so obvious. I mean, he handed over the diaries of his wife to you without even reading them first.
Yes.
I thought, wow, that's trust.
It really was amazing that he did that.
Yeah. So you had two very, very close relationships and many other very close industry relationships throughout. I mean, the list of people that you have worked with is enormous.
Yeah, Americana is a small world, and most people that work in Americana know each other or know of each other or have, people in common. So I feel very fortunate. But when my husband and I were working on my husband's an engineer, and when we were working on the audiobook, he would joke and say, so many names. And there are a lot of names in my book. I didn't want to leave anybody out.
Well, the stories, there are so many terrific stories in this book. There's one little racy one about Keith Urban. You want to tell that one?
Yeah, well, the headline is I saw Keith Urban naked. When I was Keith's career started in an Americana band called The Ranch. And so he was playing every week on Tuesday nights, I think it was, at this little club called the Pub of Love in Nashville. When I got there, he was doing it and did it until Capitol Records signed The Ranch, and then very quickly realized that wasn't going to work for hits, and they got rid of The Ranch and they kept Keith as a solo artist. So by this time, I had known Keith for years. And I was freelancing. I was working at GAC, but I was also freelancing, and I would write sometimes for Playgirl magazine. And the reason is because they would always do a music Q&A, and they would pay $6,000 for a cover story. And all it was a little bit of intro and then Q&A. So it was so easy to write. I could do it in an hour or two and make $6,000. So I loved those assignments. So Charlene, who was my editor, called me one day and she said, "Are there any up and coming, really cute country guys?" And I was thinking, Keith Urban has a new song out, And so I called Keith. I didn't call the label. I called Keith directly, and I just said, "Hey, do you want to do a Playgirl cover story? Because I'll make $6,000 on this, and I could really use the money." And he's laughed. He's like, "Yeah, I'm game." So he came over to my office, and we did the interview, which was really fun because he was having a good time with it. And then there was a photo shoot because it was a cover story, and I had to call the label then because I can't hide a photo shoot from them. So I called Fletcher Foster, who was the head of PR at Capitol Records at the time, and I came clean. I said I already did the interview. And so Fletcher was like, "All right, well, we're doing the photo shoot at my house so I can keep control on it." And I said, "Keith doesn't have to get naked. They'll just, have him shirtless and, make it look sexy or whatever." So Fletcher, his house was the perfect place to do it. I was really happy he offered it. So that morning I got to the photo shoot, and there was Keith standing in the kitchen in silk boxer shorts eating a blueberry muffin. And I was like, well, this is going to be fun. And just then Fletcher came racing through the kitchen. He had a work emergency and he had to leave. He's like, "I gotta go," and he pointed at Keith and I, and he's like, "Don't let anything bad happen." We're like, "It's a photo shoot. What's gonna happen?" And so we go into the living room where the photographer, Greg Wiener, not making that up, is setting up his gear and everything. And he looks at Keith and he goes, "Why don't you lose those boxer shorts?" And I'm laughing, thinking there's no way. And Keith just took them right off. I was like, "Oh, Fletcher is going to kill me. This is going to be bad." Now, you have to remember that nobody knew Keith Urban's name at this point in time. You could have asked anybody on the street, and they would not have known his name. No idea he was going to become a star. So, yeah.
So that Playgirl spread probably has followed him through his career, thanks to you.
It has. There have been times where I've seen him on late night TV, and somebody pulls it out and shows it, and I'm like, oh, God. Yeah, I think we both kind of regret it now, but we didn't know. I still got my $6,000.
Yeah. There are just some fabulous stories. We don't have time to go into all of them. But before we close, I wanted to bring up one thing that I noticed through the book. One observation. You bring up a lot of birthdays, which I thought was wonderful. You mark people's birthdays, and you and your friends celebrate everybody's birthdays, which it was just really nice. The second is that there are a lot of stories of these songwriters crying here and there. Chris Christopherson crying, and Vince Gill crying. And I wonder, do you think that there's a connection between being highly sensitive and in touch with your emotional self and being a really gifted singer-songwriter?
Yeah, I really think there is, because Chris and Vince, honestly, they cry at the drop of a hat. It's not hard to, they get very emotional very easily, and so do I. I mean, it's very endearing. These people that I've been lucky enough to work with all these years and be friends with feel very deeply. And it's a gift to be around that.
And it brings me to the title of the book. I meant to ask you about that. So can you tell me what the threads are that came together in the title of your book?
Well, I think, poets, I always say that Americana people are poets with guitars. They're troubadours, they're songwriters. So poets was, pretty prevalent in my mind. But then dreamers, I think of myself as a dreamer. And so the poets are the artists, and the dreamers are those of us who have surrounded the artists and helped them make their dreams come true as well as our own. It just felt right, poets and dreamers.
And you're certainly one of them.
I'm definitely a dreamer still.
Well, and you've been one who has supported these
Yes.
artists, certainly. Yeah, yeah. So you're a Wisconsin native,
Yes.
and we talked a little bit before. You've been in Nashville for a really long time,
3 years, yeah.
and you sustained some really hard losses at the end of the book. You lost Guy Clark, you lost your mother, and it sounds like you might want to come home to Wisconsin.
I'm definitely coming home to Wisconsin. Yeah. I will be 65 in February, and I told my husband I want to be back here before I'm 66, so next year.
Well, we would love to have you in Wisconsin.
Thank you, because I want to come home.
Yeah, you point out so many wonderful Wisconsin connections in the book, from Loretta Lynn's daughter's tavern in Conover. Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Yeah. To people that you worked with in Nashville who are from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
But sounds like you've made family wherever you have been.
Yeah, Wisconsin people find each other too. It's like the first, when I first got to Nashville, it was August, and so preseason was happening. And so I started asking, is there a Packer bar? And I went to the Packer bar, the first Sunday I was there, second Sunday I was there, and there they were, all the Wisconsin people that live in Nashville. I found them all in one Sunday. So
That is
great.
Yeah. It has been just a joy to talk with you about this book. It's a magnificent book with so many wonderful stories. We didn't even get to the time where Chris was nearly run over by a railroad train, and Bono being in a bar with only 10 people in Nashville and things like that. It's there's so much. It's very rich, and it's beautifully written. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here at the Wisconsin Book Festival.
I'm really happy to be
appreciate
here.
it.
And thank all of you so much for being here. Thank you.
So we have about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. If you've got any questions for Tamara. Yeah.
You definitely wear your emotions on your sleeve, because when she mentioned Keith Urban, you turned about 10 shades of red and it's kind of stayed there. But I just wanted to ask you about Wisconsin venues. Like, you grew up in Milwaukee, but around here, the places where I go for Americana, I'm really not in Madison. It's Fort Atkinson for the Cafe Carp, and it's Stoughton Opera House. And I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the Wisconsin venues that you enjoy seeing Americana music?
Well, the Stoughton Opera House is a big one. I love that one. Let me think. Oh, well, I love in Milwaukee, the Riverside and the Pabst Theater are really great. They bring in good music. There's a place in Milwaukee that I haven't been yet, but I've been reading. It's called the Vivarium, and it's also part of the Pabst and Riverside family, and I've seen that they've had a lot of Americana music there. There's a auditorium in Door County. Can't think of the name of it. And they bring in a lot of Americana music. Marty Stewart's there this weekend. Those are the ones that just come to my mind. Once I get back here, I'll be trying to find all of them.
So I've had the opportunity to bring a couple of Americana bands to Madison for a couple of shows each. One is Ryan Hood and the other is Run Boy Run, which, by the way, has more women in it than men. And I notice how male-dominated this seems to be. So I thought that's nice. Anyway, they're both out of Tucson, Arizona. So it begs the question, is Tucson a mecca of Americana music, or are there meccas of Americana music everywhere?
I think they're everywhere. When I was researching the book and writing, when Americana was first starting, you know, it was because it was everywhere. There wasn't a central location. Boston, San Francisco, Austin, Texas, Chicago, certainly Nashville. Really just, you know, it's music, folk music that comes from everywhere.
If you want to ask a question, put your hand up high, and Sam in the back is bringing the mic around.
I saw a picture of Taylor Swift and wondered if you knew her.
I've met Taylor several times. She is an extraordinary human, extraordinary artist, and even though she is a pop star, I still put her on the Americana scale because she writes her own songs, plays her own instruments, does whatever she wants to do, and a great role model for women. So yeah, love Taylor.
Would you talk a little bit about the state of Americana music and the association and where it goes from here?
Well, you know, Americana is always changing and growing, and quite frankly, at my age, I'm not keeping up with the younger artists. So when Chris retired in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I kind of let my business go. So I don't really know. I mean, there's some young artists that I hear that I'm really excited about, like Molly Tuttle. I think she's great, and Billy Strings, and there's this young band in Canada that you probably haven't heard of yet, but they're called Horsebath. I know it's a terrible name, they won't change. They're really great, you know, so there's still wonderful music, but I don't really know what's happening from a business standpoint. Streaming has certainly killed songwriters making a living the way they used to. There used to be a lot of middle-class songwriters that could make a living writing songs, and that's over. So I just don't know where it goes from here.
I worked with Tamara
Yes.
years ago.
Yeah, at the
And
radio station.
I just have to make a comment because I see all these great photos up here. And when we worked together, Tamara took a lot of pictures. In fact, most of the pictures I have from around that time, she took. And I'm just wondering, the ones that you weren't in, did you take a lot of those? Because I see
Yeah.
they seem like you did.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I was the photographer at the radio station. I was the official photographer, so.
What was it that got you to make the move from Milwaukee to Nashville when you were kind of early in your career?
So I had no intention of going anywhere because I had this great gig at this radio station. But Raul Malo from the Mavericks talked me into moving to Nashville. When the Mavericks were first starting, they had a big audience in Milwaukee and Chicago. And so they played both cities a lot. And Raul and I got to be friends, so I would always go see them play. And we were one late night, you know, because we were young, so we were out late. We were at Ma Fisher's on the east side of Milwaukee eating pancakes and eggs at 3 a.m. And he said, I think you should move to Nashville. And I was like, why would I do that? And the next thing you know, a couple months later, I moved to Nashville. So, yeah, it's all Raul's fault.
Hi, I know John Prine is a Chicago guy and Kentucky is family, but he wound up in Nashville in his later years. I'm wondering whether you got to know him and how he fits in. I love his music. It's so quirky, you know.
Yeah.
And Chris Christopherson is one of the people who helped him get known.
Yes, yeah.
from
Yeah, Chris
old
discovered John Prine, brought him into Yes, I knew John because when I was working at GAC, we rented an office from Oh Boy Records. And so I got to know John there, and then I got to know him even better during my years with Christofferson. And he was a wonderful, wonderful guy. I never officially worked with him, although he did do My Old Kentucky Home for the Stephen Foster tribute I produced. And I loved being around John. He was a quirky guy, as you say, but so sweet, so wonderfully sweet. And he would go to the grocery store at the same time every day, and he would go to he always ate lunch at Arnold's every day. So if anybody in town wanted to find John Prine, they knew where to find him because he had this routine when he was in town. Very sweet.
I'll try to do this. Okay, Tamara, back in 2002, Guy Clark came to Madison to perform over at Luther Blues, and I was the second in line waiting to get in, and there was Guy Clark right there at the door. And you know how big he is in stature, right? How he was. And it's just, I was in awe. So I walked in, and I had my boyfriend at the time with me, and he said, well, let's sit in the front row. I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I said, I'll blurt something out. I said, okay. So we sat there, and people started coming in to get seated, and the front row stayed empty for a while, and then a fella came in, and he had a small red backpack. And he said, don't you want to sit up here in front with me? I said, no, I can't do it. Told him the same thing. Thought I'd blurt something out. And he said, well, I came in from Omaha, Nebraska. And he says, usually I follow Bruce Springsteen's band because I'm friends with all of them. And sometimes I tape. And I said, by any chance, are you taping this today? He said, yes. And he said, if you give me your name and address, in a week from now, I will mail you a copy. I'm passing this on to you.
Oh, wow.
Berlin.
Thank you.
Berlin couldn't make it. Apparently, he had broke his back at the time.
Oh, he broke his arms, yeah.
Okay,
He
so that what
fell
it
off a
was.
roof,
So
yeah.
Sean came,
Oh, yeah.
and Mary
like it.
Gachet opened, and I never
I
knew
love your
about her.
T-shirt. Wow,
this is for
thank
you.
you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
And what a great T-shirt you've got on.
Yeah.
Guy Clark's Homegrown Tomatoes.
This was from her fundraiser for the film.
Oh,
Thank you. What's your name?
Luann.
Luann. Pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
what a gift.
Welcome. Enjoy.
Oh, that's cool. I will.
Hi, you've talked a lot about many famous male performers. Could you talk a little bit more about Americana female artists?
Yes.
I'm not very familiar, so I'd love some tips.
Yes. Well, Emmylou Harris is the queen. Gillian Welch, Brennan Lee, Gretchen Peters. There's so many. Margot Price is younger, newer. There's so many young women and older women artists. I never had the pleasure of working. I worked with Brennan a little bit, but for some reason I always ended up with these crotchety old guys. It just never worked out. I did some project work with women, like I helped Gretchen Peters with an album release, and then there's Mary Gachet. She's really wonderful. Yeah, there's a lot of women worth checking out. I have a playlist that I put on Spotify. It's called Poets and Dreamers, and it's 150 songs. So if you want to just get a taste, there's a lot of women on my playlist. Oh, I'm sorry. Where? I was just going to ask about Rhiannon Giddens. Oh, yeah, Rhiannon. Oh, my gosh. She's fabulous. I would absolutely say check out Rhiannon Giddens.
You know, I often think of Americana music as being kind of roots music, old time. is there undiscovered music out there?
That's
Oh,
a great question.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure there is. One of the beautiful things about having a job like I've had is that I do get to see the stuff that doesn't make it, out of the world, but is still great stuff. So there are so many talented songwriters and musicians out there. I think in every city. I went to high school in a suburb of Milwaukee called St. Francis, and a guy that I went to high school with is a guitar player and a songwriter, and nobody knows his name. But whenever I'm in Milwaukee, I go see him play because he's just so. His stage name is Peter Mack. In case you're in Milwaukee, you want to check him out. But he makes a living doing this, but he's not known outside of the region. I think there's a lot of people like that. And every city that I travel to, I would always try to go out and see some local music while I was there. And it's everywhere, which is, wonderful.
And I would think what we're finding in the world of classical music is that there are shelves and shelves and dusty stacks of music by female composers that's just being uncovered, and music by composers of color, and just stuff that was set aside and never hit the light of day. And I would bet there are some amazing songs from 18th, 19th centuries that are just ready to be uncovered. Yeah,
I bet.
Thank you. This is wonderful. What about Iris DeMint?
Oh yeah, Iris
yeah.
is wonderful. Yeah. There's so many. I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, but there's a lot. And if you just Google Americana women, you'll come up with them.
And her husband, Greg Brown, is a terrific songwriter.
Yeah.
I'm going to Nashville in a couple of months. So where's the place I should go that to hear some great music that isn't going to be, an obvious place?
Yeah. Boy, Nashville's a problem these days. The Station Inn is always worthwhile. That's a little bluegrass club. There's a place called the Basement East on the east side, and it really depends on who's playing there. But Nashville has just become so overrun with tourists that there's not a lot of Americana music happening on a regular basis in Nashville anymore. Just everybody has to leave to play it. So it's a sad state of affairs, but.
Tamara, you've met a lot of people, and obviously this has been very interesting hearing you. Is there that one moment in your career where you just kind of pinched yourself and said, I can't believe I'm in this room? When you think of that, there's probably been several, but is there the one that just stands out?
Yeah, there have been several, but there is one that stands out, and I thought after that I don't need to do anything else, and that's when I was advising one of the advisors on Ken Burns' series about country music. I think it came out in 2019. It was an 8-part series on PBS. I encourage you to watch it. I was there to be an advisor specifically about Americana, and Ken ended up using 2 songs I produced on albums I produced in the series. He covered Guy Clark and Chris Christopherson extensively, and working on it, it was years long, I think 6 years that we worked on it. And working on it was a thrill, but watching it air and realizing that my life's work was being validated on the screen by Ken Burns, who might be one of the greatest documentary filmmakers ever, that was it for me, yeah. And working with Ken was a dream, so that would be it.
I recall a couple times in Nashville going to the Bluebird Cafe. We haven't been there in a while, but open mic on Monday nights.
Yeah.
Do they still do that?
They do, but because of the TV show Nashville, the Bluebird has become such a, it used to be more of a local thing, and now it's become such a tourist thing that it's really, really hard to get in. You have to be at your computer at 8 a.m. Monday morning when the tickets go on sale, and there's only 80 seats, you know, so it's really hard to get into. There is, on Monday nights now, though, thank you for saying that, there's a place called Third and Lindsley, and oh, what is this name of the band? There's a band that plays there every Monday night, and Vince Gill plays with them a lot. And it's a great, they do all kinds of Americana and Western and swing, and they're really great. So yeah, if you're in Nashville on a Monday night, go to Third and Lindsley. Anybody else?
All right. I think we're all set with questions. And we'll say thank you so much for being here, Tamara.
Oh, yes.
And your books are right around the corner. They're being sold by Mystery to Me. And Tamara's going to be there signing her books and available for a little bit of conversation if you'd like to stay and purchase a book. I know she would certainly appreciate that, and so would we. Thank you for being here as part of the Wisconsin Book Festival. We sure
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.